For 20 years, every Ash Wednesday, my husband would confess to the same priest, until the day the priest died and left a letter revealing the secret he had kept, a secret that destroyed my family and forced me to make the hardest decision of my life at 40 years old. Hello to everyone watching. My name is Eleanor, I'm 78 years old, and today I'm going to share with you a story that I've kept deep in my heart for almost 4 decades. Before I begin, I'd like to ask you watching to leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any stories of resilience like mine. And please tell me in the comments where you're watching from today. I'd love to know who's listening to my story. I was born in 1947 in a small town where everyone knew each other. It was a different time, you know. We women were raised to get married, have children, and take care of the home. My parents, Martha and George, were simple people, but with strong character. My mother taught me to sew from an early age. She said a woman needs to have a skill, even if it's just to make clothes for the family. Little did she know that this ability would one day save my life and my children's. I met Harold in 1962 during the town's summer festival. He wasn't from around here. He had come for work, representing a big company from the city. He looked elegant in his well-pressed suit with a smile that lit up the entire hall. We had a 15-year age difference, me with my freshly turned 18 years and him at 33. Back then, this seemed normal, even desirable. An established man with a career who could provide security. We dated for only 6 months before the wedding. My father said that long courtships gave people something to talk about, and Harold seemed eager to start a family. Our ceremony was simple, but to me, it was like a fairy tale. I wore a dress that I sewed myself with lace my mother had saved for that special day. Our 3 children came in the early years, Elizabeth in 1964, Michael in 1966, and Melissa in 1968. We were what people called a picture-perfect family. Everything seemed perfect on the outside. Harold was respected in town, worked as a sales representative, traveled quite a bit, but always came back with presents for the children. I took care of the house and the children, and in my spare time, I sewed for others, making custom clothes for the wealthier ladies in the area. But you know when you feel something isn't right, even if you can't point out what it is? It was like a shadow that sometimes passed over Harold's face when he looked at our children. A sigh too deep when he returned from a trip. Small things that I noticed, but preferred to ignore. One thing always intrigued me. Harold wasn't a religious man. He went to church only on special occasions, to keep up appearances. But there was one day of the year when he would not miss church for anything in this world, Ash Wednesday. And it wasn't just to receive the ashes on his forehead. He insisted on confessing to Father Thomas, always the same priest, every year without exception. "It's a promise I made," he would tell me when I asked, "something between me, God, and the priest." And I, raised not to question my husband, accepted that explanation. The years passed. In the early 1970s, we began to face financial difficulties. Harold said business wasn't going well, that he had made investments that went wrong. Suddenly, my small sewing work went from being a supplement to becoming essential for supporting the household. I worked until late at night after the children were asleep. My calloused hands told the story of a woman who wouldn't give up in the face of difficulties. I transformed the guest room into a workshop. I began to make not only custom clothes, but also small repairs, hemming pants, adjusting dresses, any service that could bring some money home. Harold didn't like it. He said it was humiliating for him that his wife needed to work so hard, but there was no alternative. The children needed to study, eat, dress. I remember nights when I cried silently over the fabrics, with aching hands and worry tightening my chest. But in the morning, it was always the same routine. Wash my face, smile for the children, prepare breakfast, and move forward. The 1980s arrived, and our children were grown up. Elizabeth had married young like me. Michael was in college in the city, returning only on weekends. Melissa was finishing high school and dreamed of becoming a teacher. Life followed its course with its everyday joys and sorrows. Until 1987 came. That year, Lent began in late February. As always, Harold went to church on Ash Wednesday, but something was different. When he returned home, he was pale and agitated. I asked what had happened. "Father Thomas is sick," he said almost in a whisper. "Very sick." In the following weeks, he seemed increasingly nervous. He lost weight, couldn't sleep properly. I thought it was concern for the priest, who really was very ill. Advanced stage cancer, according to the rumors circulating around town. One April morning, the church bell rang with that slow, heavy sound that announces someone's death. Father Thomas had passed away. The entire town attended the wake. Harold was there, more dejected than ever. He prayed for a long time in front of the closed coffin, his hands trembling as he made the sign of the cross. A week after the burial, something unexpected happened. The new parish priest, a young man recently arrived named Father Paul, knocked on our door one Sunday afternoon. He asked if he could speak to me privately. Harold wasn't home. He had gone to visit a sick friend, or at least that's what he said. "Mrs. Eleanor," the priest said solemnly, "Father Thomas left something for you." And then he handed me a yellowed envelope. My name was written on the front in the shaky handwriting of a sick man. Inside was a 4-page letter and a small key. "He asked me to deliver this to you personally after his death," explained Father Paul. "He said it was a matter of conscience." I thanked him, confused. Why would the priest leave something for me? We barely spoke beyond pleasantries after Sunday service. When I was alone, I opened the letter with trembling hands. And it was there, on that Sunday afternoon, that my world fell apart. The words of Father Thomas, written in his final days of life, revealed the truth that had been hidden from me for over 20 years. "Dear Mrs. Eleanor," the letter said, "if this letter has reached your hands, it is because God has already called me to his presence. I write motivated by my conscience, which does not allow me to leave this world, taking with me a secret that has caused you so much harm, even without you knowing." The letter went on to tell how in 1964, Harold began confessing about a serious sin he had committed. He had become involved with his secretary, Nancy, a young woman from Chicago, where he frequently traveled for work. From this relationship, a son was born, William, in the same year our Elizabeth came into the world. "For years," the letter continued, "I listened to his confessions, guided him to tell you the truth, to assume his responsibilities honestly, but he always claimed he couldn't, that it would destroy his family, that you wouldn't bear it. And so, year after year, on Ash Wednesday, he would come to renew his repentance and promise to end that situation, a promise he never fulfilled. The most painful revelation came next. The money that Harold supposedly lost in unsuccessful business ventures was, in fact, being sent monthly to support Nancy and William. While I worked myself to exhaustion to maintain our home, my husband was supporting another family with the fruit of my labor. The key that accompanied the letter opened a small cabinet in the church sacristy, where, according to the priest, copies of deposit receipts and some letters exchanged between Harold and Nancy were kept, which proved everything that was being revealed. The priest explained that he had kept those documents as a guarantee in case the truth ever needed to come to light. "Forgive me for being the messenger of this pain," Father Thomas concluded. "But I cannot appear before God carrying the weight of having been complicit, even through the seal of confession, in such a great injustice against such a dedicated woman as you." I finished reading the letter and was paralyzed. Time stopped. My entire life, my entire marriage, everything I believed I had built, crumbled at that moment. The pieces of the puzzle finally fit together. The frequent trips, the financial problems, the shadow in Harold's eyes when he looked at our children. I don't know how long I sat there, in the living room armchair, the letter fallen on my lap, my gaze lost in emptiness. That's how Melissa found me when she returned from a friend's house. Worried, she asked what had happened. I couldn't answer. I just folded the letter and put it in my apron pocket. I got up, went to the kitchen, and began to prepare dinner as if nothing had happened. But inside, a storm was brewing. That night I couldn't sleep. Lying next to the man who had betrayed me for more than 2 decades, I felt a mixture of anger, pain, and despair that I had never experienced before. The question that wouldn't leave my head was, what would I do now at 40 years old with 3 children and an entire life built on a lie? The next morning, I waited for the children to leave the house. Elizabeth was already married and living in another neighborhood. Michael had returned to college in the city, and Melissa had gone to school. Finally, we were alone, Harold and I. I placed the letter on the kitchen table while he drank his coffee. I didn't say a word, just pushed the paper toward him. His eyes scanned the first lines, and I saw his face turn pale. The cup trembled in his hands, spilling coffee on the white tablecloth my mother had given me as a wedding gift. That dark stain, spreading across the fabric, seemed to symbolize how his lie had stained our entire life together. "Eleanor, I can explain," he stammered, but his voice failed. "Explain what, Harold?" "Explain that while I sewed until dawn to feed our children, you were sending money to your other family? Explain that for 20 years you lied looking me in the eyes?" I had never spoken to my husband like that. I was raised to be submissive, to accept, not to question. But something inside me had broken irreparably. Harold tried to take my hand, but I recoiled as if his touch burned my skin. He began to cry, thick tears running down that face I thought I knew so well. "It was a mistake, a terrible mistake," he sobbed. "It happened just once with Nancy, but she got pregnant. What could I do? Abandon my own child? And why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you trust me? I was afraid, Eleanor, afraid of losing you, of losing our family. Each year that passed made it harder to tell the truth." The conversation continued for hours. Between tears and accusations, Harold revealed the entire story. How he met Nancy during a business trip to Chicago in 1963. How what should have been just one night turned into a nightmare when she announced the pregnancy months later. How he, in panic, decided to support the child without telling me anything. At first, they were small amounts, but as the years passed and with William's education, the amount increased considerably. "I never stopped loving you," he insisted. It was just a moral obligation I assumed. But his words sounded empty to me. Each of his sentences revealed new lies, new years of deception. I discovered that his monthly trips to Chicago, which he said were for work, were to visit William and Nancy, that the presents he brought for our children were a way to alleviate his guilt, that the financial problems we faced weren't caused by unsuccessful business ventures, but by his commitment to 2 families. When there was nothing left to say, I got up from the table. My legs were weak, but my resolution was strong. I went to our bedroom and began to separate his clothes, placing them in an old suitcase we kept at the back of the wardrobe. "What are you doing?" he asked, standing at the bedroom door. "I want you to leave this house today," I replied without looking at him. "I can't share the same roof with you anymore. Eleanor, please, let's talk more. Let's try to fix this." "Fix it, Harold. You broke something that can't be fixed. You broke my trust. You broke our marriage. You broke our family." He begged, cried, promised to change, said he would end any contact with Nancy and William, but I realized it wasn't about that anymore. The issue wasn't whether he would continue with the other family or not. The issue was that for more than 20 years, he had made me live a lie. Every moment of happiness, every difficulty overcome together, every anniversary celebrated, everything was stained by continuous betrayal. That afternoon, when Melissa returned from school, she found her father sitting on the curb, the suitcase beside him, his face devastated. She ran into the house and found me in the workshop, cutting fabric with more force than necessary. "Mom, what happened? Why is Dad out there with a suitcase?" How do you explain to a 19-year-old daughter that her father isn't the man she thought she knew? How do you destroy the image of the father she adored? Your father and I need some time apart. That was all I could say. The following days were a nightmare. I had to tell the truth to my children. Michael returned from the city, furious, wanting to confront his father. Elizabeth didn't believe it. She said there must be some mistake, that the priest was senile when he wrote that letter. Melissa just cried, unable to understand how her world could collapse so suddenly. The small town, where everyone knew each other, soon buzzed with rumors. I went to the church with the key left by Father Thomas, opened the cabinet in the sacristy, and found the evidence mentioned in the letter: monthly deposit receipts, letters from Nancy thanking for the money, even some photos of William at different ages. A boy who looked so much like Harold that it hurt to look. Some people in the community supported me, especially older women who had gone through similar situations in silence, but many others criticized me for not forgiving, for destroying my family. Divorce wasn't just a religious taboo at that time, it was a social stain. A separated woman was viewed with suspicion, as if she had failed in some way. We should be thankful that our husbands, at least, support the children they have outside the marriage, Mrs. Johnson, a respected lady from the community, told me after Sunday service. Many abandon the children to their own fate. That comment made me furious. How could we, as women, accept so little? How could we normalize betrayal, lies, disrespect? At that moment, I was certain I had made the right decision, however painful it was. Harold stayed at the town motel for a few weeks. Then he rented a small house near the train station. Every day he came to our house, no, my house now, trying to convince me to reconsider. He brought flowers, gifts, promises. One day he brought a document. It was a copy of William's birth certificate with Harold's name as father. He thought that would demonstrate his responsibility, that he hadn't denied his son. To me, it was just another stab to see there, in black and white, proof of his betrayal, dated the same year I gave birth to Elizabeth. The financial difficulties increased after the separation. Harold began paying child support, but it wasn't enough. My small workshop could barely keep the bills paid. One night, after the children were asleep, I sat in front of the sewing machine and cried, not for the lost marriage, but for fear of the future. How could I, a 40-year-old woman with incomplete education, support a household, a family? That's when I looked at my own hands, calloused from so much work, and remembered my mother's words. A woman needs to have a skill. I had a skill. I knew how to sew like no one else in town. Maybe it was time to transform that ability into something bigger. The next day, I went to the bank. The manager, Mr. Robertson, had known me since I was a little girl. I explained my situation and asked for a small loan to expand my workshop. I saw the hesitation in his eyes. A separated woman, asking for money without a husband to co-sign, was almost unheard of at that time. Mrs. Eleanor, with all due respect, wouldn't it be better for you to reconsider your situation with Mr. Harold? A reconciliation would be more prudent. I swallowed my anger and responded with as much calm as I could gather. Mr. Robertson? For 20 years I've sewn for half the ladies in this town. I've never delivered a piece late. I've never done inferior quality work. I have 3 children to support and plans to expand my business. If the bank can't help me because I'm a woman and I'm separated, I'll find another way. I stood to leave, but he asked me to wait. After a long conversation, where I presented my business plan, made on notebook sheets with careful calculations, he agreed to grant me a loan. It was smaller than what I had asked for and with higher interest than would be charged to a man, but it was a start. With that money, I transformed the workshop. I bought 2 more sewing machines, hired 2 young women as assistants, and began to make not only custom clothes, but also small collections that I sold to stores in town. I worked from sunrise to sunset, slept little, worried a lot, but I was determined not to fail. 6 months after our separation, I received an unexpected visit. It was a Sunday afternoon, and I was alone at home. Michael had returned to college. Melissa was at a friend's house studying for exams, and Elizabeth rarely visited us since the separation. She had taken her father's side in the family conflict. The doorbell rang, and when I opened the door, I saw a woman I had never met in person, but whose face I knew well through the photographs found in the sacristy cabinet. Nancy was younger than me, prettier too, with long black hair and almond-shaped eyes. But there was something in her face, a paleness, a fragility, that immediately alarmed me. "Mrs. Eleanor," she said, her voice trembling, "forgive me for coming to your house, but I needed to speak with you personally." I was paralyzed for a moment. There she was, the woman who for so many years had shared my husband with me without my knowing. The woman who had given Harold a son in the same year I gave birth to our first daughter. "I don't want to create problems," Nancy continued in the face of my silence. "But I thought you should know. I'm sick, very sick. The doctors have given me just a few months to live." She looked so fragile that, despite all the anger I should have felt, I found myself inviting her in, offering a glass of water, listening to her story. And it was there, in the same kitchen, where I had confronted Harold months before, that I met a woman who, like me, had been deceived for years. The clock in the living room struck 3 o'clock when Nancy began to tell me her story. Sitting across from me, with trembling hands, holding the cup of tea I had prepared, she looked much older than her 43 years. Cancer had already consumed much of her body, leaving only shadows of what had once been a beautiful woman. "I met Harold in 1963, when I began working as a secretary at the company where he was a sales representative," she explained. "At the time, I was 19, newly arrived in Chicago from a small town. I was alone in the city, without family, trying to rebuild my life after losing my parents in an accident." As she spoke, I realized something surprising. Nancy had also been deceived by Harold. He never told her he was married in the first months of their relationship. When she discovered she was pregnant and finally confronted him, he revealed the truth, that he had a wife and would soon have another child. Nancy, desperate and without options, accepted the situation he proposed. He would support the child, visit when possible, but would never leave his official family. "For years I believed that one day he would leave you and stay with us," Nancy confessed, looking at the floor. "That was the lie I told myself to bear the situation." William grew up expecting his father to come live with us someday. Every month, when Harold appeared with money and some presents, my son believed that would be the visit when his father would finally stay. My heart ached, not just for me and my children, but also for that boy, now a 23-year-old man, who grew up in the shadow of a promise that would never be fulfilled, and for Nancy, who, like me, had wasted years of her life waiting for something from Harold that he would never be capable of giving. "Why are you telling me all this now?" I asked, confused by this unexpected visit. Nancy took a deep breath, gathering courage. "I have terminal leukemia. The doctors have given me at most 6 months to live. I'm putting my affairs in order, and I need to think about William's future." A heavy silence settled between us. Outside, the sound of children playing on the street seemed to come from another world, a world where mothers didn't have to worry about what would happen to their children after their death. "Does Harold know about your illness?" I finally asked. "Yes. I told him 3 months ago when I received the diagnosis. He promised he would take care of William, but—" She hesitated. "But I don't trust him, not after so many broken promises. And William, he's so angry with his father after learning about your separation. He finally understood that it was never a matter of Harold not being able to leave his wife. He simply never wanted to choose." At that moment, something changed inside me. The anger I felt toward Nancy transformed into a strange solidarity. We were 2 women who had dedicated their lives to a man who deserved neither of us. "I'd like to meet your son," I said, surprising myself with those words. Nancy's eyes filled with tears. "He's outside, in the car. I wasn't sure if you would accept us, so I asked him to wait." And so, on that Sunday afternoon, I met William. He entered my living room with the defensive posture of someone expecting rejection. He was tall like Harold, had the same eyes, the same face shape. The resemblance was so striking that I felt a tightness in my chest. Seeing my reaction, he seemed to shrink even more. Mrs. Eleanor, he said formally, extending his hand. I ignored the extended hand and, in an impulse I didn't even understand at the time, hugged him. I felt his tense body slowly relax against mine. When we pulled apart, I saw that his eyes were moist. You are not to blame for the choices your father made, I told him. None of us are. We talked for hours that afternoon. I discovered that William had managed to get into engineering school, but was thinking of dropping out to care for his sick mother, that he worked part-time at an auto repair shop to help with expenses, that he dreamed of opening his own business someday, and that, despite everything, he still loved his father, even with all the disappointment and anger he felt. When they finally said goodbye, it was already night. I promised to stay in touch, to visit Nancy in the hospital if necessary. But as I closed the door, I felt an enormous weight on my shoulders. How would I explain to my children that I had received in our house the other woman and her son? How would they accept the existence of a half-brother who was the same age as Elizabeth? I didn't have to wait long to find out. Melissa arrived soon after, finding me still sitting in the living room, thoughtful. It took just one look at my face to know something had happened. She was always the most sensitive of my children, the one who could read my emotions even when I tried to hide them. Mom, what happened? And I told her about Nancy's visit, about her illness, about William. I expected to see anger, resentment, rejection. Instead, I saw my 19-year-old daughter demonstrate a maturity that surprised me. They're victims too, aren't they? Just like us. Michael and Elizabeth didn't react as well when they found out. My son returned from the city the following weekend, and upon hearing about my meeting with Nancy and William, exploded in fury. How could you receive them in our house, Mom? That woman destroyed our family. No, Michael, I replied firmly. Who destroyed our family was your father with his lies and betrayal. Nancy was deceived just as much as I was. Elizabeth refused to speak to me for weeks after learning of the meeting. For her, who idolized her father, I was betraying Harold by getting close to his other family. The irony of the situation didn't occur to her. In the following weeks, I visited Nancy in the hospital several times. Her condition was rapidly deteriorating. During one of those visits, she held my hand with surprising strength for someone so debilitated. "Promise you'll look after William when I'm gone," she asked, her voice almost a whisper. I know I have no right to ask this, but I have no one else to turn to. I looked at that woman, my involuntary rival for so many years, now reduced to skin and bones in a hospital bed. I thought of William, who came to visit his mother every day after work, with deep circles under his eyes and the weight of the world on his shoulders. I thought of my own children, of how I would do anything to ensure their well-being. "I promise," I finally said. "I'll do what I can for him." Nancy died on a rainy dawn in October 1987, 6 months after my separation from Harold. William called me from the hospital, his voice choked, asking for help with the funeral arrangements. When I arrived there, I found him alone in the corridor, lost like an abandoned child. Harold was nowhere to be found. The funeral was simple, with few attendees. Some of Nancy's co-workers, neighbors, the owner of the shop where William worked. Melissa insisted on accompanying me, a gesture of support that meant more than she could imagine. We stood side by side, watching the coffin being lowered into the earth, while William, alone at the front, seemed to have aged years in a few days. It was only when everything was over, when the last people left the cemetery, that Harold appeared. He approached cautiously, as if fearing our reaction. He was thinner, disheveled, with deep circles under his eyes. He stopped a few steps away, looking at his son. "William, He didn't complete the sentence. William advanced toward him and, in a quick movement, landed a punch on his father's face. Harold fell, but didn't retaliate, didn't say anything, just stayed there, blood running from his split lip while William collapsed in tears. "You promised you would be by her side. You promised you wouldn't leave her alone in the hospital." Melissa and I watched the scene paralyzed. Finally, I gathered the courage to approach. I gently placed my hand on William's arm. "Let's go home," I said. "You shouldn't be alone today." He looked at me, then at Harold, then back at me, and nodded in silence. As we walked away, Harold remained motionless, watching us leave, a solitary figure against the gray sky. That night, William slept in the room that once belonged to Michael. When I woke up the next morning, I found him in the kitchen preparing coffee. He seemed lost, displaced, as if he didn't know what his next step would be. "And now?" he asked simply when he saw me enter. It was a question I also asked myself every day since the separation. And now? How to move forward when everything you knew reveals itself to be a lie? How to rebuild a life from the ruins? "One day at a time," I replied, sitting at the table. "You still have college to finish. A future ahead. I can't afford college without my mother's help. And the apartment. The rent is due next week." There was a moment of silence while I thought. My small sewing business was growing, but I still struggled to maintain my own house, support 2 children. Elizabeth was already married, but Michael and Melissa still depended on me. Even so, looking at that young man who had lost everything, I made a decision. "My workshop is growing," I finally said. "I'm thinking of expanding, turning it into a small clothing factory. I would need someone to handle the administrative part, the accounts, the contracts." He looked at me confused. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering a partnership. You finish your college, help me in the business, and we all live under the same roof until you're able to find your own way. What do you think?" His eyes filled with tears. For a moment I thought he would refuse. Wounded pride, perhaps. But then he extended his hand across the table, taking mine. "Why are you doing this for me? After everything my existence has caused to your family?" I looked at those hands, a man's hands already, but still with traces of the boy who never had a true home. And I answered with the only truth that mattered. "Because none of us chose this situation, William. But we can choose how we'll proceed from here. And I choose not to let one man's mistake destroy more lives than it already has." That afternoon, I went with William to the small apartment he shared with Nancy to get his belongings. It was a modest place, but clean and organized. On the walls, photographs told the story of that small family of 2. William, child, teenager at high school graduation. Nancy, always by his side, smiling proudly. In no photo did Harold appear. As I helped pack books, clothes, small mementos, I thought about how life takes unexpected turns. A few months before, I was a dedicated wife, living what I believed to be a solid marriage, despite its difficulties. Now I was separated, sheltering under my roof the son my husband had with another woman. If someone had told me this in the past, I would have laughed at the impossibility. But life is like that. It places us in situations we would never imagine and then observes how we'll react. When we returned home, Melissa had already prepared the room for William. She had changed the sheets, arranged the closet, even placed a small vase of flowers on the nightstand. A delicate touch that spoke volumes about my daughter's generous heart. "So you feel at home," she told William shyly. The look they exchanged at that moment, well, let's say it was the beginning of something I hadn't foreseen, but which would become one of the greatest joys of my life in the years to come. Life has a curious way of weaving its threads, transforming what seemed an impossible knot into a new design, different from what we imagined, but sometimes more beautiful. That's what happened in our house in the months following William's arrival. In the beginning, of course, we had challenges. Michael returned from the city for the end-of-year holidays and found William installed in what was once his room. The tension was palpable. 2 young men of the same age, raised in such different circumstances, now forced to live under the same roof because of the choices of a man who had disappointed them both. "He's not my brother," Michael said one night when we were alone in the kitchen. "I won't pretend we're a happy family, Mom." "I'm not asking you to pretend anything," I replied while preparing dinner. "I just ask that you try to see that he's as much a victim as you are in this story." The first weeks were difficult. Conversations interrupted when William entered the room, awkward silences during meals, the tension that hung in the air like a heavy cloud. But gradually, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. The transformation began in the workshop. With the small loan I had secured, we had bought 2 more sewing machines and hired 2 young women to help with production. William, with his knowledge of mathematics and organization, began to systematize our processes. He created an inventory control system, organized the delivery schedule, established partnerships with suppliers who offered better prices and terms. One afternoon, I received a call from the owner of the largest department store in the region. He had seen some of the clothes we produced and wanted to order a small collection for the next season. It was a huge opportunity, but also a frightening challenge. I, who had always worked with individual custom pieces, would now need to produce on a larger scale, with tight deadlines and consistent quality. When I shared the news during dinner, I saw the gleam in William's eyes. "We can do this, Mrs. Eleanor," he said, using the notebook to make quick calculations. "We'll need 2 more seamstresses, maybe 3, and a larger space. This workshop won't accommodate the production." "More employees? A larger space? I don't know if we can afford it," I hesitated. "I have some savings," Melissa said suddenly. We all looked at her surprised. "The money I've been saving for teaching college, I can postpone for a year and invest in the family business." "No, Melissa," I replied immediately. "Your education comes first." "I can study and work at the same time," she insisted. "And what's the use of a diploma if we can't sustain ourselves? This is a unique opportunity, Mom." To my surprise, Michael, who had been observing everything in silence until then, spoke up. "I have some money saved too. It's not much, but it can help. And I can come back from the city on weekends to assist with the organization." I looked at my children. Yes, my children, because at that moment William was already like a son to me too. And I felt an emotion I hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope, not just for the business that could prosper, but for the family we were rebuilding, different from before, but perhaps stronger, precisely because of the fissures we had overcome. In the following weeks, our lives transformed into a whirlwind of activities. We found a warehouse to rent, not very large, but enough to accommodate the machines and create a space for cutting, sewing, and finishing. We hired 3 more seamstresses, all women who, like me, needed to support their families. William supervised the administrative part. Melissa learned the production process and still found time to start her teaching course in the evening. And I took care of the design, the patterns, the final quality. The first order was delivered 3 days ahead of schedule, to the store owner's amazement. The quality of the pieces exceeded his expectations, and soon he made a second order, larger than the first. Word of mouth began to work, and other store owners in the region sought us out. In 6 months, our small workshop had transformed into Eleanor's Creations. The name was the unanimous choice of my children, despite my initial reluctance. We had 10 employees, most of them women in situations similar to mine, separated, widowed, or with absent husbands, all needing to maintain their homes with dignity. One afternoon, I was in the improvised office at the back of the warehouse, calculating production costs for a new order, when William entered with a serious expression. "Mrs. Eleanor, I need to tell you something." My heart froze. In all those months, Harold had tried to make contact several times, both with me and with William. We always refused. Had William given in? Had he decided to give his father a chance? "It's about Melissa and me," he said, sitting across from me, his hands restless. We're getting closer than as siblings. I know it must seem wrong, but..." I took a deep breath, relieved it wasn't about Harold, but at the same time concerned about this new situation. Technically, they weren't blood siblings. Melissa was my daughter with Harold. William was Harold's son with Nancy, but it was still a delicate situation. "You're adults," I finally said. "I won't say it's a simple situation, but if there are true feelings..." "We're taking it slow," he assured me. "Talking a lot. Neither of us wants to complicate this family even more." If you think it's not appropriate. I looked at that young man who in such a short time had become so important in our lives, who had faced the loss of his mother, the rejection of his father, and yet found the strength to move forward, to help us rebuild not just a business, but a family. What I think, I said with a smile, is that life has put too many obstacles in all our paths. I won't be the one to create another one. The relief on his face was visible. Later that day, Melissa sought me out for the same conversation. I confessed that William had already told me and that, although the situation was uncommon, I wasn't opposed. The tight hug she gave me said more than any words could. And so our family continued to transform, to find new paths, new balances. The business prospered, demanding more and more of our time and energy, but also providing us with a financial stability I never imagined achieving after the separation. Elizabeth, who had initially distanced herself by taking her father's side, began to gradually draw closer again. Her marriage was experiencing difficulties. Ironically, she suspected that her husband was also maintaining a parallel life. One day, she showed up at the factory with the look of someone who hadn't slept for days. "Mom, I need your help, your advice." We sat in the small cafeteria we had improvised for the employees, now empty as it was after working hours. As she opened up about her suspicions, about her husband's coldness, about the fear of living a repetition of the story that had destroyed our family, I held her hands in mine. "Elizabeth, regardless of what you discover, remember, you have choices. It may seem like the world is falling apart, but you are strong, stronger than you imagine." "How did you know what to do, Mom? How did you have the courage to start over at 40? I thought for a moment before answering. I didn't know. I was terrified, but each step I took showed me I could take one more and one more. And when I looked back, I saw I had traveled a path I never imagined being capable of. After that conversation, Elizabeth began to frequent our house more. She brought her young son, my first grandchild, to get to know his grandmother and uncles better. Gradually, she reconnected with Michael and, more cautiously, with William. The wound was still there, but it was beginning to heal. At Christmas 1988, just over a year after the separation, I managed to gather everyone at the table for the first time. Elizabeth came with her son, but without her husband. They had decided to try a reconciliation, but the process was slow and painful. Michael brought a girlfriend from college, a sweet and intelligent young woman who immediately won everyone over. Melissa and William, increasingly close but still discreet in their displays of affection, took care of decorating the house. It was a simple celebration, but full of meaning. When I looked around the table at those faces I loved so much, I felt immense gratitude for life, even with all its unexpected twists. We were a different family now, rebuilt from the ruins, but still a family. The year 1989 brought new challenges and opportunities. The factory continued to grow, and William, now graduated in engineering, implemented new production techniques that increased our efficiency without sacrificing quality. Melissa, completing her teaching degree, divided her time between teaching at a local school and helping with business administration. Michael, on the weekends when he came from the city, brought fresh ideas for our marketing, learned in his business administration course. I, who was once just Harold's wife, was now known as Eleanor of Eleanor's Creations. People greeted me on the street with respect. Store owners wanted to do business with me. Other women sought me out, asking for advice on how to start their own ventures. One afternoon, as I returned from the bank after closing a deal to further expand our space, I found Harold on the sidewalk in front of the factory. He was thinner, with graying hair, less proud posture. My heart skipped a beat, but not from longing or love, just from surprise at seeing him there after so many months of avoiding any contact. "Eleanor," he said, removing his hat, "you look beautiful. Success suits you." "What do you want, Harold?" I asked directly, without hostility, but also without the cordiality that once characterized our relationship. "To know how the kids are, how William is. I heard he's living with you now." They're all fine. Better than ever, actually. There was an awkward moment of silence. He looked at the factory sign, at the movement of employees coming and going, at the delivery truck parked at the door. "You built all this on your own," he commented, and there was something in his voice I couldn't identify. Admiration? Regret? "I always knew you were capable, but I never imagined—" "I didn't either," I interrupted. "I never imagined I could rebuild my life this way." Sometimes, Harold, what seems to be the end of everything is just the beginning of something better. He nodded, his eyes moist. "Do you think they'll ever forgive me? That you'll forgive me?" I looked at that man who was once the center of my world, for whom I would have done anything, and felt not anger or resentment, but a strange compassion. He had lost everything, the respect of his children, his wife's love, even the chance to truly know William, an extraordinary young man who, despite everything, still carried his blood. Forgiveness is a long road, Harold. I can't speak for others, only for myself. And what I can say is that I no longer hold anger in my heart. The pain you caused forced me to find a strength I didn't know I had. For that, in a way, I'm even grateful. Can I see the kids someday? They're not kids anymore, Harold. They're adults who make their own decisions. If they want to see you, it will have to come from them. He nodded again, replaced his hat, and slowly walked away down the sidewalk. I watched him until he turned the corner. A solitary figure, who I once believed to be the most important man in the world, and who now was just a stranger with whom I shared 2 decades of my life. I entered the factory with a strange sensation, a mixture of closure and new beginning. William was in the office, bent over spreadsheets and fabric samples. Melissa was organizing the week's delivery schedule. The machines hummed, the seamstresses chatted animatedly as they worked. This was my world now. A world I had built from the ashes of the old one, piece by piece, day by day. And for the first time since I opened that letter from Father Thomas, I felt truly at peace. The years passed like pages of a book turned by the wind, too fast to tell every detail, but leaving deep marks on each chapter lived. Today, sitting on the porch of my house, with my 78 years weighing on my shoulders, but with a light heart, I look at what we built and still marvel at the paths life chose for us. The 1990s brought winds of change for our family and for Eleanor's creations. While the country faced economic crises, our small company continued to grow, sustained by values that had always been part of me: honest work, unquestionable quality, respect for each person involved in the process. In 1992, we took a step I never imagined possible. We bought land at the entrance of town and built our own warehouse, much larger than the rented one. I remember the inauguration day as if it were yesterday. The mayor attended, local newspapers did reports, and there I was, a 45-year-old woman who 5 years earlier trembled with fear of the future, cutting the red ribbon at the entrance of what would become one of the largest clothing factories in the region. The most emotional moment of that day, however, wasn't the public recognition, but something much more intimate. After all the guests had left, I gathered my children, all of them, in the main office. Michael had completed his college degree and decided to return permanently to our town, bringing the knowledge acquired in the city. Elizabeth, after finalizing her divorce, her suspicions had been correct, had been working with us part-time while raising her son. Melissa and William, increasingly close, had formalized their relationship to the scandal of some in town, but with the full blessing of our family. "I want you to know," I told them that day, "that all of this belongs to you as much as to me. Every brick of this place was built with our joint effort, with our shared sweat. From today on, we are officially partners in equal parts." I handed each of them a folder containing the legal documents establishing the partnership. I saw tears in my children's eyes. Yes, all of them, including William, who had long ceased to be the other woman's son, to simply become my son. "Mom," said Michael, always the most formal of the four, "I don't know what to say. You built this. You deserve the recognition. We built it together," I gently corrected, "and together we'll carry it forward. The next decade brought greater challenges. Globalization began to affect our market with the entry of imported products at prices that seemed impossible to compete with. Many clothing factories in the region closed their doors, unable to adapt to the new times. But we had something different. Our strength wasn't just in the products we made, but in the people behind them. Each employee, and now also some male employees, as we had expanded beyond sewing, was part of a larger family. We offered fair wages, dignified working conditions, and something that money can't buy: respect. It was William who proposed our great turning point in 1998. Instead of competing with imports on price, we would compete on quality and exclusivity. We began to develop our own collections, focused on artisanal pieces that valued regional culture. Handmade embroidery, applications of lace produced by local craftswomen, fabrics dyed with natural dyes from our region. What seemed like a huge risk turned out to be our salvation. In 2000, we opened our first store. We no longer just produced for other brands, but sold directly to the consumer, telling the story behind each piece. Soon came the second, the third store. Our brand began to be recognized beyond the region's borders, reaching large urban centers. Melissa and William married that same year. It was a simple ceremony in the garden of my house, with only family and close friends present. There were those who turned up their noses, who made malicious comments about the sibling couple. But we knew the truth. They shared no blood, just the bad luck of having the same man as a father figure, a man who failed them both in different ways. Speaking of Harold, he reappeared in our lives more constantly in the early 2000s. He was sick, a cancer that was slowly consuming him. He sought out Michael first, then Elizabeth, finally Melissa. To each he asked for forgiveness in his own way. Some agreed to visit him occasionally. Others kept their distance. I never interfered in these decisions. They were adults capable of choosing how to deal with the father they had. When he sought me out, on a rainy afternoon in 2003, 16 years after our separation, he found a very different woman from the one he had left. No longer the submissive and insecure wife, but a respected businesswoman, a proud mother, a woman who had discovered her own strength. "I'm dying, Eleanor," he said without preamble, sitting in the living room of my house. He was unrecognizable, thin, with skin yellowed by the disease. "The doctors say I have a few months." "I'm sorry," I replied sincerely. Despite everything, I couldn't feel pleasure in his suffering. "I wanted to ask for your forgiveness. I know it's too late, that it's too little, but I need to say it. I deeply regret everything I did. The harm I caused you, the children, Nancy, everyone." I remained silent for a few moments, observing that man who was once the center of my world and was now just a fragile shadow of what he had been. "Harold," I finally said, "a long time ago I left anger and resentment behind. Not for you, but for me. Carrying that weight would only prevent me from moving forward. You forgive me then?" I took a deep breath before answering. Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting or erasing what happened. It means I choose not to let the past determine my present or my future, and yes, in that sense, I forgive you. I saw tears in his eyes. Perhaps the first true tears I ever saw Harold shed. He tried to say something more, but coughed violently. When he recovered, he asked in a low voice, "And William? Is he well?" "He's great. Graduated as an engineer, married Melissa. They're very happy together. He's an upright man, hard-working, dedicated to his family. The kind of man any father would be proud of." "Father?" He repeated the word as if tasting its flavor. "I was never a real father to him, was I? Nor to the others." I didn't answer. There was no need. We both knew the truth. Harold died 3 months later in a city hospital. William hesitated to go to the funeral, but ended up attending more for Melissa and his siblings than for the man in the coffin. I observed my 4 children side by side before their father's body, each lost in their own thoughts, in their own form of mourning for what they never truly had. a present and honest father. Life took its course. The 2000s brought the expansion of the company into electronic commerce, an idea of Michael's that opened doors we never imagined. Our artisanal pieces, with their story of tradition and overcoming, began to reach customers throughout the country, then abroad. In 2007, at 60, I decided it was time to gradually step away from the daily management of the company. Not from tiredness, but from believing it was time to let the new generation take the reins completely. I became a kind of advisor, present in the big decisions, but dedicating more time to myself, to my grandchildren who were beginning to arrive, to the small joys life offers when we allow ourselves to enjoy them. William and Melissa had 2 children, Theodore, born in 2005, and Nancy, named in honor of the mother William lost so early. Elizabeth, besides the son from her first marriage, adopted a girl in 2010, a decision that made her happier than I had ever seen her. Michael took longer to start a family, but when he did, it was all at once. His wife gave birth to twins in 2012, to all our joy. Eleanor's creations transformed into the Eleanor Group, encompassing not just clothing production, but also a sewing and craft school that trains new generations of professionals, a foundation that supports women in vulnerable situations, and a brand nationally recognized for quality and social responsibility. In 2017, we received a National Women's Entrepreneurship Award. They insisted I receive it personally, although I was already 70 years old and preferred to stay behind the scenes. On stage, in front of hundreds of people, I briefly shared our story. Not the story of betrayal and lies, but of overcoming, of reconstruction, of the rebirth that comes from the ashes of a life that seemed destroyed. Often, I said at the microphone, with a voice that still surprises me with its firmness, it's in the greatest crises that we discover our true strength. I was a 40-year-old woman, raised to be a wife and mother, when I found myself alone with 3 children to raise. Fear was my constant companion, but each step, however small, showed me that I was capable of one more, and another, and another. Today, sitting on this porch, watching my grandchildren play in the garden as the sun begins to set, I think of the long road traveled, of the young Eleanor, 18 years old, who dreamed only of being a good wife, of the 40-year-old woman who trembled with fear before an uncertain future, of the 60-year-old businesswoman who looked back and barely recognized herself at the beginning of the journey. My children insist I write my memoirs, that I share my story with more people. Your journey can inspire other women, Mom, Melissa says, whenever we touch on the subject. Perhaps they're right. Perhaps there are other Eleanors out there, paralyzed by fear, suffocated by relationships that diminish them, unable to see the strength they have within. Father Thomas's letter, which once destroyed my world, is kept in a box at the back of the wardrobe, along with other memories from that time. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if he had never written that letter. Would I have spent the rest of my life in ignorance? Would Harold have taken his secret to the grave? We'll never know. What I do know is that that letter, although it brought immeasurable pain at the time, was also the catalyst for the greatest transformation in my life. It was the push I needed to discover who I really was, what I was capable of. William approaches, interrupting my thoughts. He's 61 years old now, his gray hair giving him a distinguished air. He sits next to me on the porch, holding 2 cups of tea. "What are you thinking about, Mom?" he asks, handing me one of the cups. He has called me Mom for so many years that it seems it has always been that way, that we have always been family. About how life takes unexpected turns, I reply, sipping the tea. About how what seems to be the end can be just the beginning of something much better. He smiles, understanding perfectly. His story and mine are intertwined in ways neither of us could have foreseen. United not by blood, but by something much stronger, the choice to be family, to love one another, despite all the circumstances that could have separated us. And as the sun sets on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I feel a deep peace. The journey wasn't easy. There were days of despair, nights of tears, moments when I thought I couldn't take another step. But each difficulty overcome brought me here, to this moment of fullness. The priest's letter revealed a secret that held pain, betrayal, and lies. But it also revealed something much more important: the strength that always existed within me, just waiting for the opportunity to manifest. And for that, in a strange and unexpected way, I am grateful, because in the end, I discovered that the greatest confession wasn't heralded to the priest every year, but the one I made to myself when I finally recognized my own worth. When I realized that I was much more than someone's wife, someone's mother. I was Eleanor, whole, complete, sufficient. And that, my dears, is the true story I want to leave as a legacy. Not a story of betrayal, but of rebirth. Not of loss, but of gain. A story that begins with an ending, but flourishes in countless new beginnings. If you who are listening to me are going through a difficult moment, if you feel that your world is falling apart, remember, the ashes of what was can be the fertile soil for something new and more beautiful. I am living proof of that. And if I, a simple woman from a small town, managed to transform my greatest pain into my greatest strength, you can too. This is the lesson I carry at 78 years old, looking back with gratitude and forward with hope. Life rarely follows the path we plan, but perhaps your plan was never as beautiful as what destiny had in store for us. And so I end my story, not with a period, but with an ellipsis. Because life continues, always reinventing itself, always surprising, always inviting us to discover new strengths within ourselves. If this story touched your heart in any way, please leave a like on this video. Subscribe to The Grandma's Diary so you don't miss other stories of resilience like mine, and comment where you're watching from. Your presence here means a lot to me. Also, share it with someone who needs to hear that it's possible to start over, no matter the age or circumstances. Thank you for listening to me today.